From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
It comes amid growing fears of a possible summer surge. The number of counties at high COVID risk there in orange doubling to nearly 300 in just the last week. 45% of Americans are now living in a medium or high risk area.
We are seeing a swell in cases. When you have a sheer number of volume of cases that are being infected, that's going to translate into more hospitalizations, unfortunately more deaths.
And in those areas of high transmission, the CDC again telling people to wear masks indoors. The city of Philadelphia bringing back a mask mandate in schools.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 25th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, COVID Crossroads. Joining us to talk more about it via Zoom is Dr. Mark Rupp. Dr. Rupp is a professor and chief in the Division of Infectious Diseases at UNMC. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Kathy, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you. It's great to be on the program again.
All right, you bet. For the past 2+ years, we have heard this term crossroads used at various times, right? What I'd like to do today is have your thoughts on how or when this virus goes from being a pandemic to an endemic, starting with the definitions of each of those.
Well, from a very simple standpoint, pandemic just means that you've got an outbreak that's worldwide. And then endemic is a term that we use when a disease or a condition is standardly seen in a region or amongst a population. So with this SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID-19, it's relatively new, right? We didn't have any explanation for this just a little over 2 years ago. So it's really not settled into any kind of a predictable mode. And so I think that's really the key between it being a pandemic, epidemic situation versus more of an endemic kind of process.
Okay. Next, I want to put up a couple of maps for our viewers. These are courtesy of the CDC. There was some confusion over these two maps in terms of the community transmission. And Dr. Rupp, I'd like you to just kind of walk us through them.
Sure. So the map on the left, which was shown in the preamble to the program, is a relatively new rendition that the CDC has put forward, trying to assess what the impact of the virus is in any given region. And so I endorse this type of thought, is they're trying to not only show the levels of transmission within a community, but also the impact of that transmission, mostly looking at what is the rate of hospitalization, what is the true impact within the community. The map on the right is the one that people are more used to seeing throughout the pandemic, showing just the amount of transmission within the community, but not really taking the next step and translating that into impact. The map that just looks at the transmission, unfortunately at this point, is probably a gross underestimate of how much illness is going on. The map on the left is starting to get into a little bit more of that thinking of how do we learn to live with this virus? How do we continue to go forward in our society despite the fact that we know SARS-CoV-2 is going to remain in the human population for the foreseeable future? So I can see where people would get confused by both of these maps, and they do show just a little bit different information. But I think the take-home message, as was announced, again, as you showed the maps initially, was that map on the left showing the impact with our communities is changing dramatically. And so we now have nearly half of the population in the United States, really within just the last couple of weeks, that are living in areas that are having a high impact, and people need to take more aggressive control measures, particularly in those areas. But I think even in those places where you're in the green, you look at the map on the right and you realize, hey, it's not going to be long before we're also in more of a high impact situation.
So Dr. Rupp, as you're talking, it's kind of gotten me to thinking about travel, right? Especially as we head into the summer months. So if there are some areas that are at higher risk, what would you tell our viewers, either those who are from Nebraska or those who have visitors here, right, who might be from those areas? What would you tell them about travel here, especially in the near future?
Well, I do think that people need to be cognizant of where they're going to and what sort of precautions that they should be taking in those areas. I think that people need to measure their risk according to their own level of comfort. If I was at high risk of severe disease, I might not want to travel to one of those areas that's having high community transmission. On the other hand, there might be a graduation or a wedding or a big event where taking some degree of risk is worth it for folks. If they were going to travel, I suggest that we continue to be very careful with our masks while we're on mass transit or in other areas where we're sharing the air with others in indoor settings. And probably the most important thing is to make sure that you're up to date with your vaccination. So I would do all three of those things. Wear a mask, be careful, avoid those high-risk settings where I could, and I would make sure that my vaccination status was up to date. And then if it was an event that was important to me, I would go to it.
Okay, thank you. Let's bring this home to Nebraska. We've taken a look at the map of the country, but let's drill down into Nebraska. And as we do that, we're going to put up some graphics for our viewers here. How are we doing here right now?
Well, we're certainly much better off than we were just a few months ago when we were in the midst of the Omicron wave that really threatened to crater the medical system within the state. So we're much better off than we were a few months ago, but unfortunately, all the trends are in the wrong direction. So we're seeing an increased number of cases that are being defined, and that's in the graph there, I believe, in the middle. You've got the number of percent positivity that's going up, which is the graph on the right, and the current year is all in red. So again, people can see on the far left-hand side of all of those curves a massive spike. That was Omicron. It's come down, but now is going back up. So the number of tests are positive. The percentage of the tests are going up. The amount of people that are coming into the hospital is going up. Something that is not shown on this slide is that there is surveillance that's done in the wastewater stream of sewage plants in Nebraska. In many areas, those are likewise going up. So all of the indicators are that we're seeing more virus that's being transmitted in the community. Now, if this was just a mild cold that you could take in stride, it wouldn't be a big deal. But unfortunately, some people continue to get seriously ill. They develop need for hospitalization. Some of them are in our ICUs. Unfortunately, this is going to translate to an increasing death rate at some point in the coming weeks. And then something that I think a lot of people just don't consider as fully as they should is the long COVID syndrome. And I'm hopeful that we can talk a little bit more about that as the program unfolds.
Absolutely, and we will in just a second here. I wanted to let viewers know what percentage of the population has tested positive for COVID, Dr. Rupp?
Well, overall, if you look at United States data, the CDC recently released a statement that somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 60% or so of people have evidence of prior infection, and that's actually highest in children. And so, we've known all along for influenza, for instance, that kids are oftentimes the incubators and spread into the community. That seems to be true likewise with COVID-19. So an awful lot of us have had COVID at one point or another over the last 2.5 years.
Might not be a bad time to recap the signs and symptoms too, especially during allergy season, because I think there are folks out there who are sniffling and they're wondering, is this seasonal allergies or could I possibly have COVID?
Well, it is possible that COVID can be very, very mild or even asymptomatic, which is one of the sneaky things with this virus and one of the things that has made it so difficult to contain this pandemic. And that is that people can have mild upper respiratory symptoms, nasal congestion, a little bit of scratchy or sore throat, sometimes accompanied by other systemic symptoms of fevers, chills, muscle aches. As it gets worse, people will develop cough and shortness of breath as they get more lower respiratory tract findings. And then there's just a whole host of other symptoms that more rarely occur, rashes and neurologic symptoms and all kinds of things that can be due to COVID-19. But I think what you're relating is absolutely true, is that people can have mild upper respiratory symptoms, but unfortunately, even though their disease is mild, they can be shedding high amounts of the virus and can be fully infectious and transmitting that virus to other people. So they need to get tested. They need to take themselves out of circulation for the protection of the community at large as well as their loved ones, and then seek treatment in certain instances.
I think this would be a great time to bring up the long haul effects because I think folks are, especially what you just alluded to, if they think they have it and they're thinking, oh, it can't be that serious, I've been vaccinated, this, that, and the other. Talk about, though, short term it might not be so bad, but what can happen long term?
Yeah, long term, we're learning more and more about the ramifications of COVID-19, and frankly, they are of concern. So looking at the overall population, you can find estimates of somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10% on the low side of people with long syndrome kind of symptoms versus as many as perhaps 30%. Now, it's more common in people who are more seriously ill. But having said that, there are many people who have mild or maybe even no symptoms that then develop what we call the long COVID symptoms. These are typically fatigue, malaise, muscle aches, shortness of breath, just a lack of stamina. And then one of the more worrisome symptoms that people oftentimes see is the neurocognitive symptoms. So what people describe as brain fog, not being able to concentrate, forgetting things, all kinds of problems that they have with their neurocognitive abilities. These can be very, very troublesome, keep people out of the classroom, keep people from going back to work, and can linger for months on end. We think that some of these people may have permanent long-haul symptoms. So those are the things that oftentimes people just don't consider when they're thinking about, oh, what's the risk of COVID-19 for me? I'm young, I'm healthy. If I get it, I'm not likely to get seriously ill and end up in the hospital. But unfortunately, it's kind of rolling the roulette wheel, and your number may come up and you may end up having serious disease, or you might have some of these long-haul symptoms that can really, put a damper on your life.
Okay, thank you. So maybe a good time to remind viewers, because I think, never a bad idea to let folks know at present day what is the proper course of action. So even if I think I might, I suspect that I might have COVID, recap again what it is that we're supposed to do. And once we've tested positive, how long do we stay out of the public? So talk about that a little bit.
Kathy, great question. And so the first thing to emphasize it for people is try to avoid disease in the first place. Because again, this is rolling the dice. Every time you get COVID-19, you could end up with the unlucky number. And so get your vaccine, and we've done a pretty good job in getting the population through their primary series. So for mRNA vaccines, that's a series of 2 shots. But we've not done well with getting people to get that booster vaccine. And that booster is very important in preventing illness, in particularly severe illness. So the first thing to do is try to prevent the illness altogether. And again, we've already talked about that briefly, of avoiding some of those high-risk settings. If you do develop symptoms, it's really important to get tested. We need to do that for a variety of reasons, so we really know what's going on in the community, and so that people can take action to get access to very good medications now that can prevent the progression of disease. So if you do develop symptoms, put yourself into isolation, get tested, stay in isolation until you get those test results back. Now, if you're negative, you want to be careful, continue to wear a mask, because sometimes those tests aren't perfect, particularly if you're using one of the home test kits. Those are kind of notorious initially for giving you false negative results. And so you may want to do more than one test over a series of days. So stay in isolation, try to prevent the transmission. If you do have a positive test, you're going to want to stay in isolation, typically for 10 days. But if you really become asymptomatic, your fever goes away, your symptoms go away, and it's 5 days, the CDC relates that you can come out of isolation as long as you're being careful and continue to wear a mask. Now, if you've been exposed and you don't develop symptoms, if you are vaccinated, you don't need to go into quarantine. You just need to be very careful, watch your symptoms, and then again, if you do develop symptoms, exactly what we just described. So those are the things that people need to keep in mind. Now, we do have good medications available. So again, that's one of the reasons why you want to get tested, particularly if you're in one of those high-risk groups. So you're getting on in years, or you have underlying immunosuppressive disorders or cardiorespiratory disease, those things that predict for progression and potentially severe illness. You want to test. If it's positive, you want to get a hold of your healthcare provider, because we do have now oral medications that you can take for just a short course of therapy that can really prevent that progression of illness.
Okay. And as you're talking, I'm thinking too about a vaccination schedule. So there are folks who've been vaccinated, they've also been boosted, but now they're wondering about that second booster, and I'm sure they're kind of rewinding in terms of when was it that I had that booster? And of course they can refer to their card, but at what point should they consider that? And then do they treat it like an annual thing, like we would the flu or anything else?
Well, additional boosters, it's going to unfold over time, and we'll see where the recommendations come out as far as people needing additional boosters as we go forward. Right now, it's a 2-shot series for becoming fully vaccinated, and then a booster at about 4 to 5 months after the first shot, and then a second booster again following another 4 or 5 months. Now, the second booster is only indicated presently for those people who are over 50 years of age or who have underlying diseases that make them at greater risk for severe illness. I would anticipate that at some time in the coming months, we'll see the FDA and the CDC go ahead and extend that recommendation for boosters to the overall population. So again, right now, if you're younger and healthier, there is no indication for a second booster. Some other developments that we've had just here recently is that kids now age 5 to 11 can go ahead and get that booster vaccine. So that's a recent development. And then we anticipate, as we get into the middle of June, that the FDA committees will be meeting to look at the data for vaccination of our youngest children, those who are under the age of 5. I'm hopeful that the data will hold out, and that in our youngest kids, they will now be eligible for these vaccines that have proven so effective in preventing severe illness.
Is there anything else that you want to mention? Because that was a question that I had in terms of updating folks on or about vaccinations for the kids.
Well, kids, again, as I mentioned previously, have served as an important, ingredient in this overall recipe of how the pandemic goes about spreading. So even though kids are traditionally not as impacted by SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, they can be. And so we do have children who get serious illness. We have kids that are hospitalized, kids that have lost their lives, kids that can go on to get the chronic long haul syndrome. And then there's also a multi-inflammatory syndrome that is predominantly in children. So for all these reasons, it's important for all kids of all ages, I'm hopeful, again, as we get into June and we see what the committees are advising, I'm hopeful that all kids will be eligible to get these really very, very good vaccines.
As you're talking, I'm going back and thinking about the long haul, and I'm thinking about our viewers and people who may have tested positive and are now feeling differently than they used to. Talk to them for a minute about what they should be doing. They don't want to be reactive, I would imagine, and pick up the phone and call their doctor every time something is different. But moving forward, they would probably approach things a little differently. What would you say to those people watching right now?
Well, there's a couple things to note, and that is that, again, we've not had a great deal of experience with the long haul syndrome. So we're learning more and more about that. And I think when it's all said and done, we're going to find that it's not just one single, simple sort of situation, but there's a lot of different things that will be driving it. We don't fully understand the pathogenesis now. We think that there's a number of theories, if you will, that it can be low ongoing infection. We feel like it may be, some ongoing inflammatory disease that's being triggered by the virus, and it's just keeping people's inflammation and immunological system in overdrive, and that might explain some of the symptoms. So there's a number of theories of why we might be seeing this. Again, there's just a myriad of symptoms: fatigue, malaise, muscle aches, headaches, you name it, shortness of breath, cough, decrease in stamina, the neurocognitive things that we already talked about. In many instances, it gets better over time. There are some people, however, who are now out at 1.5, 2 years that continue to have symptoms. There's some information to suggest that some people with the long haul syndrome, if they get vaccinated, can get some decrease in their symptoms. There's also pretty good information to suggest that getting vaccinated in the first place, if you do get COVID-19, makes the long haul syndrome less likely. So again, good reasons to get vaccinated.
Okay, thank you. And you've already mentioned summer a bit, but what are your predictions for summer based on the data that we've seen and what we've talked about today?
Well, gosh, Kathy, if anybody tells you that they know exactly what this pandemic is going to look like several months down the road, I would tell you to turn around and run the other direction. So, it's very conjectural on my part what this is going to look like, a few months down the road. I am concerned that because we have new variants that are coming on the scene, and this is BA4 and BA5 that we've seen in South Africa that are causing some problems there. We're starting to see those in the United States. We also have the BA2 and subvariants that are circulating widely in the United States right now. Because we have waning immunity, either from the Omicron wave where so many people got infected, but natural immunity, disease-induced immunity, we know wanes after several months, as does vaccine-induced immunity. So we have a population in general that their immunity is coming down just as some of these other variants are coming on the scene. Gives me pause and makes me concerned that we may see increasing amounts of illness over the summer. Now, I'm hopeful that we're not going to see anything like we saw with Omicron, but that, again, is just a guess. If I had to put my money down and make that guess, it would be that we're going to see increased amounts of levels of disease and impact within communities, but not a major surge that comes on this summer. But again, that's just my guess.
Okay, thank you. In the meantime, mindful that this is Memorial Day weekend, I did want to ask you, where are we in terms of the numbers? How many lives has COVID claimed as we sit here today?
Kathy, it is just truly tragic. We passed that grim milestone just here recently where over 1 million lives had been lost in the United States. Unfortunately, that's actually an underestimate. And when you look at the excess lives lost, it's actually higher than that. And then the really tragic issue is that probably fully a third of those were completely preventable if we had really mobilized and had gotten a larger percentage of the population vaccinated. So many of those lives lost were just unnecessary. And that's the thing that saddens me the most throughout this whole pandemic, is that we've just not been able to get the message across, not been able to get people to take the actions that they need to protect themselves and their loved ones. It is truly heartrending when you think about all of those folks who have lost their lives, in many cases, unnecessarily.
Yeah, advocates are really pressing hard to try to set aside an official day to remember these folks. You know, we do have memorial walls. In fact, Nebraska has one, anyimpact.org. As we show our viewers what this looks like, thinking about these individuals, what's coming to mind for you, Dr. Rupp?
Kathy, again, it's you know, that old saying of a million deaths are a statistic, a single death is a tragedy. People get numb to this, and I think that's really happened, is that you know, it's just a statistic for so many folks. But you know, a million lives lost. These are all individuals. They're, you know, mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and sons and daughters. All of these people had folks that deeply cared for them, loved them, and missed them. And they've left a hole. They've rent the fabric of our country irreparably. And then again, the biggest tragedy of this whole thing is that so many of them could have been saved had we been a little bit better in preventing this illness.
Talking with Dr. Mark Rupp today about COVID Crossroads, and in the spirit of bringing this full circle, and we have about a minute left, Dr. Rupp, we will have gone from a pandemic to an endemic when? Finish that.
Well, I think when the illness is much more predictable and becomes less impactful on our society. And so, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's anybody's guess as to where this is going to go, where these new variants are going to emerge, how much they're going to spread. And so while we have all of that uncertainty, I don't think we cross that line into it just being another disease that we take in stride and crosses that threshold to where we sort of have classified it as endemic.
Dr. Mark Rupp, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your time and your expertise and for all you're doing for us in the community. Folks wanting more information can certainly go to covid.cdc.gov, dhhs.ne.gov, nebraskamed.com, neimpact.org. I'd like to thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.